Okay, so this is that cross support for the air suspension, and I told you that in the last chapter of this, chapter 61, I told you that I thought that there was tar on it, that I had to clean it off, and I was going to clean it up. Well, so the rest of the video is not going to be this boring stuff of cleaning things up. I've actually progressed on the back of the truck towards the goal of getting a rolling chassis here. Welcome to chapter 62 of the haul truck build. What I did is I took a scraper and scraped it off over on the welding table. It turned out it wasn't tar. It was like grease with dirt caked into it. I scraped it off, brought it over here. What I did was doused it down with this. This is called Zepp Industrial Purple Degreaser, and it's very strong. You dilute this stuff like 25 to 1, I think it is. But anyways, I soaked it down with this, took that brush, kind of brushed it all off, and it cleaned it up pretty good. Now it's still wet, but it really cleaned it up very good. So what I probably just going to have to do is take a wire wheel to it, take a flapper disc, sanding disc, clean it up, sand it off, clean it out, and then I can probably paint it with that POR 15, and then it will have to be painted a final coat after that, because that POR 15 can't be exposed to UV or UV. So it any place where it's exposed to UV or sunlight, it has to be painted over with a finish coat. But anyways, I just thought I'd show that to you. This stuff works really great. Not being endorsed by it, but it does. It works great. Okay, back over here to the back of the haul truck, and what I've done is got that hub back together. I cleaned it up. I actually took that rotor over to the welding table and just cleaned it off with a Scotch-Brite pad and a flapper disc, like a 60 or 80, I think it was, flapper disc on it. I didn't really want to take a lot off of it. I just wanted to clean off the surface rust and stuff like that off of it. Put the bearings and seals back on. What I did is, as somebody suggested, just took some emery cloth and went over that bearing surface where the bearing mates onto the axle housing, and then test fitted it before I put it back into the hub underneath that seal, to make sure that it would fit on there good, and it does. I mean, you have to get it dead on. If you kink it, or not kink it, but twist it a little bit, if it gets off-centered a little bit, it's hard to get back on again, but it'll go. I'm gonna do the same to the other side, but I just wanted to bring you over here and show that to you. Was doing this stuff in between my other things that I have to do. Okay, I just shown you that clip about me fixing, putting this hub back together, putting the bearing seals in it, what I had done about the axle spindle to get the bearing and that seal to fit over it better, about sanding it. Now this is in back after the haul trip to Washington, and I've come to figure out or realize that probably I'm going to be making a lot more hauls this winter than I have ever done in the past. So I've got to get back into the routine of being able to go away on a haul for a while and then come back in and jump back into this thing. And it is kind of a routine. You feel you kind of find that in your job, your daily job. Sometimes you get pulled off one project and put it on another project, and you've got to get into a routine or a rhythm of going from one project or one job to another project or another job. And I've got to get back into that mode. So I've got some renewed vigor after the Washington road trip, because I took that stuff down to Brian in Kentucky and was talking to Brian, and just being able to talk to somebody like Brian kind of rejuvenates your enthusiasm. We kind of were talking about my A3 Cummins engine, and it just got a rejuvenation into me about getting back onto this project and getting to the point where I can get that engine back out and rebuild it like I want to build it. So here we are back at the hub, axle hub, and I told you that I had done that. So what I'm going to do is set up a camera, and I'll show you me mounting the hub back onto the axle, and then starting work on the other side. Again, the short-term goal is to get these hubs back on, get everything back together in the rear of this truck so that I can make a rolling chassis out of it. I want to get that sleeper test fitted onto the frame and onto the cab of the truck, so that I know what I've got to deal with that before I go and pull the engine out for a rebuild. So let's get going. I'm going to set you up on a tripod, and you can see me reassembling this rear hub on the driver's side. So just understand here, that bearing is in that hub, just floating in between the outer race of the hub and the seal. So you're trying to hold this 80-pound hub up and get that bearing to align onto that shaft. I kind of got it up there with the old bearing on it. The old bearing in here. I just want to draw it in a little bit using that old bearing in this nut. Let me go get a ratchet. So what I'm doing here is, once you get that thing so that the threaded portion of the actual shaft is proud of the outer bearing, you can start that nut on it, and I'm using the nut to draw in the hub fully, get that bearing and seal seated onto that outer race. So I just use the old bearing as a guide and pushing or pulling, using the nut to push it into it. Okay, one side on. Let me go over to the other side and try and get that side on too. I'll take you over there. I've got to figure out what the torque specs are on this thing and do all of that. So let me try and get the other side in place again also. So I'm over here working on the passenger side rear hub, and I'm still having trouble. I did use a little armor cloth on it, but I am still having issues getting that back on, which is kind of ironic because, again, I mentioned this before in another video. I assembled this hub over at the workbench when the axle was over there on the stands, and the thing went right together. I came over here and I took it apart to change those positioning of the caliper mounting bracket from front to back, and so I had to take that hub assembly off of it again, and I just am really having issues getting the thing back on again. And like I said, I just tried putting some emery cloth on it. Now, I didn't sand it a lot, but I really didn't think that I should have to sand it a lot, because I didn't, because of the non-issues that I had getting it together back over at the bench. But I'm going to keep working on it. So again, this is that passenger side, which I felt is the one that should have gone on the easiest, but I struggled with this one. Again, I couldn't get it to get that axle housing proud of the outer bearing so that I could start the nut on it. So what I actually did is I used the floor jack and kind of held the hub up after repeated tries and attempts to get that bearing set with the hub. I use a floor jack to kind of get that hub up and centered, and then you'll notice that that hammer and punch are there laying on the floor. What I did is I just took the punch and tapped it with a hammer to find out how it was bound up in there, and then went to the opposite side and realigned the bearing so that it wasn't bound anymore. And once I had done that, I was able to get it pushed in far enough so that I could get the outer, get that nut on using the outer bearing and pull it in using the old bearing on it. Again, I used that old bearing to pull it in and seat it, and then pull the old bearing out and replaced it with a new bearing. Okay. I still haven't looked up the torque specs. I should have them written down someplace, but let me double check it, and we'll go from here. Okay, so it's a day after I finished up putting the hubs on. Basically, I put the driver's side hub on one day, got the next day I got the passenger side hub on. What I did this morning is, there's a couple of things. When I took these axles apart, it took the axle out of the axle housing. I had a hell of a time getting these the axle off. Usually you pull the bolts off, take the nuts out, take the nuts off, and just smack it with a hammer in the center of it, and it'll pop out. What they did is put silicone sealant on there instead of a gasket, and there are cones, wedge-shaped cones, that go in there to hold the axle centered onto the bolts and to kind of secure it better. The tighter that you tighten the nuts on there, the farther that you drive that cone into it, holding that axle in place better. I had a hell of a time getting it off. You can still see remnants of the gasket material that they used on it. So one of the things that I do, I don't want to repeat that process and do that to myself or somebody else again. So what I'm trying to find is the gaskets for it. The other thing is, there is a washer. It's a locking washer, and let me just grab it here. It's this locking washer, and what it does is You tighten the inner nut to the required torque, which is 184 foot-pounds. Then back it off a half a turn, or they allow 1 to, I think it's 3/1000ths of play into it. After you achieve that, you put this locking washer on it, and it's keyed so that that pin that sticks down on the inside diameter goes into the key slot, and you peen over these things to hold that nut in place. Well, they make a new nut, an outer nut that is self-locking, so that you torque the inner nut, and then you put this new nut onto it, and it locks in there on the outer one, and you get away from this thing. This side is good. The other side, that keyway, or that protrusion that goes into the keyway, is kind of worn out really badly. So I'd like to get those Pro Torque locking nuts onto that thing. Try and find gaskets for it. And then the other thing that I did today is I had, you've probably seen in some of the past videos on this project, I had a couple of 22.5-inch rims laying around here that I had picked up with the axle. What I did is I took them over to the truck tire dealer, local truck tire dealer, and I'm going to have them mount two 11R 22.5s on it, drive tires, so that I can mount them onto these hubs, and thus getting a rolling chassis like I had talked about in the previous clip of this video. So those are two things that I've taken care of today. The guy still hasn't called me back about the nut. He wanted to know the make and model that it came off of, another auto parts store type of situation where if you don't go in with make and model, they're not going to know what the part is. Well, these people are a little better than that. I was able to give him the model number off of the axle, and he's going to get a hold of Dana Spicer and find out exactly what size nut that is and the thread pitch and everything on it. If that doesn't work, Dana Spicer can't tell him that. I would take one of the nuts in and get one of those Pro Torque or two of those Pro Torque nuts that lock it in there. But just a lot of legwork that has to go into the project. I'm over here at the welding table. What I did is brought the rear shock brackets off of the air suspension for the haul truck over here just to clean them up, because I was going to paint them with that POR 15 before I started reassembling this stuff. You try and get a coat of that paint onto anything that would be concealed, which this bolts to the bottom of that trailing arm bracket, so that this side and the bottom of that trailing arm bracket would be concealed, and I wouldn't be able to get a coat of paint on it afterwards without retaking it apart. But the reason why I brought you over here to show you this is I brought them over here, and hopefully you can see that the metal started cracking where there's a 1/2-inch bolt that goes through there. Now, the 4 bolts that go up through the other part also go through there, but there must be some stress on it in this one spot. Now, both of these brackets are slightly bent to hold the shock, and that the shock action must be fatiguing that metal in that spot. So What I'm going to do is grind it out, V-notch it out, and just weld it back together, back in, and then I'll grind it off so that it's looks normal. I'm not going to show that to you, but that's what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll show it to you after I'm done with it and get it painted. Okay, here's those shock brackets after I welded those cracks up and put a coat of that POR 15 on it. As long as I had it out and the brush was going to be toast anyways, I touched up the back of the truck in a couple of places. Let me take you over there and I'll show it to you. And back over here at the back of the truck, what I did is I took a wire wheel and a flapper disc and sanded off that where that cross member goes in between the trailing arms on the air suspension. I did it both on top and bottom and the sides and just put a coat of that POR 15 on it. I also put it up here where that old leaf spring bracket was, and back here where the trailing arm of the leaf spring bracket was, both on the inside and outside. Did the same thing on this side. There, the trailing arm of the air suspension and where the lead bracket for the leaf spring was originally on there. Now, all of this will be gone over and done again. Any places where, like the old air suspension system, I'll probably take a wire wheel to it and coat it with that POR 15. Now, when this dries, you're going to notice a difference because last can I got of this POR 15 was flat. I didn't realize it. Instead of being gloss like the rest of the frame is, it was flat. But it doesn't really matter anyways because it'll all be painted over in the long run. You can't leave POR 15 exposed to sunlight. It's not UV protected and will fade terribly. So you have to paint over it wherever it's exposed. And the reason I did that is because both sides get covered with something, so I wanted to get coats on it before I mounted that cross support and the shock bracket onto the bottom of it. Cross support on top, shock bracket on the bottom. A series of clips on how I'm kind of test fitting this thing back together again to make to get the shocks to work with the frame alignment. Okay, I had actually started this video clip and somebody walked in, so let me restart it here. I just went out, got the new tires. I had taken the rims there yesterday and to the truck tire dealer, and he put the new tires on the rims. Now, these are the tires that I'm going to be using. When I put the truck in service, I'll get 2 more, or before I put the truck in service, I'll get 2 more so that I've got 4 of them on the back, the same style, same size, same company. I'm not sure about these rims though. I just had to mount them on here again so I can make a roller out of this this frame and chassis and test fit that sleeper on there. That's one of the things I wanted to do, but I just wanted to show you guys the their 11R 22 5s, Yokos, Toyos. Yeah, Toyos. When I went to the guy, he says, "What are you looking for?" And I told him drive tires, and I'm looking for traction because of where I live. Traction, good traction tires, and the size that I told him. And I told him that no recaps, no Chinese tires. So he gave me a good price on these. But anyways, I'll get them mounted up and put on. They're already mounted logically, but I'll get them put on and show them to you afterwards. I'm working on this cross member, putting that on. I've got some other clips about that, but I went out and got these in the meantime while I was actually putting that on. I'm not finished with it yet, so those clips will be coming. I'm not sure if they're going to be before this or after it. Okay, so what I did is I just mounted the two tires onto the axle. Now it's not ready to roll yet. I still want to get this bracket in there and get it kind of, I've got to stabilize it somehow so that the frame is kind of mounted off of this bracket or off of the trailing arm of the air suspension so that it stays stable. What I might do is run some rods up through the shock bracket and tie it into this piece of angle iron that I've got here just to kind of stabilize it. But anyways, the two tires are on the two wheels and tires are on the back, and I've just got to again work on that bracket and do some other things, but there it is, getting closer to being a rolling chassis. We're going to wrap this video up, this chapter up. I'm over here at the bench. This is one of the airbags that came off of it. It's a Goodyear, and here is the model number on the airbag. Now, you would think that that would get me a new airbag. Well, it doesn't. Along with the process of getting that Pro-Torque nut and gasket for the rear axle, they also sell airbags at this place, and the place is called Fry Heavy Duty. It used to be Fry the Wheelman, and now they went into getting truck parts, but regardless of that, that number doesn't get me the airbag because apparently the bag itself is just for the bag itself, and there's different mounting applications to it, different diameters for the base and different diameters for the top on the airbag. Maybe not necessarily the top. They asked me for the diameter of the base of it. So apparently the bag has different applications and different diameter bases on the thing. So I have to get them that base diameter. But it turns out that ordering stuff for this truck is almost as long a process as taking it apart and reinstalling it. But I've got to get a couple of new airbags. So here is one of the shocks that came off of it, and as you can see, I might have been able to get some use out of it, but probably not. So I did go out and get some new shocks for it. Expensive they were. But anyways, this is going to be it for this chapter. The next time I'll show you those Pro-Torque nuts being installed, how they're installed, the issues that I had with getting this thing installed. There's a lot of things that have got to be done. I'm going to put them rods up in so that I've got a stabilized rear end onto the frame so that I can roll it around. But one of the some of the other things that have got to be done is I've got to get a panhard bar onto this axle somehow and get that axle stabilized on the frame also. But that's going to be it for this chapter. I'll bring you back and the next time, and again I'll probably show you some of that things. I'm not really sure that panhard bar is going to be part of it, but maybe by the time the next chapter rolls around, I had rolled this thing out and backed it back into for the process of test fitting that sleeper on there. One of the things that I want to mention is that sleeper, there's some wiring issues that I've still got to address in that sleeper, and they would probably be better addressed for being off of the frame than on the frame, but I still want to test fit it and figure out what I need to do to get it mounted onto the frame, where the cross supports for the suspension on the sleeper go in the back, and how it gets mounted up in front, whether it gets mounted independently onto the frame or if it was intended to be somehow mounted to the cab. But anyways, again, I'll bring you back next chapter and we'll discuss all of that. Thanks for watching, guys. Hit that like button, subscribe, share it if you think it's of interest to somebody else.